do, so then mark this guy like right here, 1913. I'm Dr. Trevis Matheus. My background's in applied meteorology and climatology. I study tree rings and look at past droughts and infer future droughts and snowpack conditions based on that.
How serious should climate change be taken, and what are some repercussions if not taken seriously?
So climate change needs to be taken very seriously. It's a global issue, and it needs to be taken seriously. The repercussions are very widespread, and we're actually already experiencing some of those. We're already seeing rising sea levels. We're seeing populations in Bangladesh having to be relocated already. The repercussions can range from anything from more severe droughts, more intense droughts, and more frequent droughts. That's the area of research that I'm interested in. But we can also see things like lengthening of hurricane seasons. We can see more severe flooding from those hurricanes as sea levels rise. The storm surge is pushed ahead of those, and that can cause more damage. And so the effects of climate change are very widespread.
How much of an impact would one country have on climate change if they did nothing to prevent it?
So this is a tough question because it depends on the country. If a country like the United States, China, India, or Russia were the top emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, were to stop or not do anything about it, then probably wouldn't be, and every other country stopped, there probably wouldn't be a huge change. But if a smaller country were to decide not to do anything about it, it might not be as big of an issue. But you have to think about it, like I said, it's a sort of global issue, and so it has to be addressed globally. Just because one country stops emitting or one country emits more or something like that, it's going to still interact in the atmosphere and be, sort of pushed around the globe globally by circulation patterns. Yeah.
So speaking like on Mexico, saying like 50 miles south, if they're not paying attention to what California is doing for climate change, and how much of an impact would that have?
So what California is doing or nationally, so if Mexico were to not sort of pay attention to what other countries and things like that are doing on climate change, and they were to just keep developing, that's sort of what we're trying to avoid doing with agreements like the Paris Climate Accords, is this idea of, sure, we have a handful of fully developed countries who have gone through their own industrial age and gone through their own uses of fossil fuels. But if every other country that's starting to develop starts to do that, we can expect greenhouse gas emissions to rise substantially. And so the idea of agreements like the Paris Climate Accords is countries like the United States actually wind up helping sort of leapfrog technologies in these countries. So instead of a country like Mexico going through its own sort of huge industrial boom and revolution where they are burning coal and massive amounts of fossil fuels, this will provide a means to give them more sort of renewable technologies and low interest loans and things like that.
So then how should Mexico approach climate change if it's not a priority due to its insufficient economy?
Yeah, so it should definitely be a priority for Mexico. If we look at the sort of the figures already, if we talk about Mexico City, they're already seeing 10 more days with 90-degree temperatures or higher per year. If we fast forward another 30 years, they're going to expect to have 20 more days. So that's not very marked, but if we look at other cities like Nuevo Laredo or other cities that are more sort of arid, they're seeing 20 more days. In 30 more years, they're going to have 40 more days with temperatures over 90 degrees. So it should be a priority, and they need to be making it a priority. One of the things that Mexico, with its economy, doesn't have the luxury, or other developing countries don't really have the luxury of countries like the United States, where, depending on politics, we can just decide, okay, well, we'll wait and see what happens with what the next administration says, or we'll wait and see what happens in 10 years. Because we have enough, sort of financial pull, so that if there's a natural disaster or something like that related to climate change, sea level rise, things like that, we can react. Versus Mexico is going to have to sort of plan and act ahead. So they're going to have to start making and impacting changes in practices now, as opposed to waiting for the flooding from a huge storm surge or something like that to react to it.
So for countries like Mexico, how does climate change pose a further detriment to their food and water supplies?
So the UN actually just released a report looking at developing third world countries, and they're already seeing issues with food security in countries like that, and they're expecting that to compound. And so food will be harder to, it'll be harder to grow food in certain environments because it'll be hotter, or there'll be droughts and things like that. And then if we have droughts and things like that, and the droughts are projected to become more severe and more frequent, we can expect there to be sort of less readily available water.
So then, would you say that, based off of that analysis, would you say that paying attention to climate change would be beneficial to Mexico and its economy and its food and water supplies?
Well, yeah, certainly. It's beneficial to every country to pay attention to climate change, and it's beneficial to pay attention to it now. In fact, we need to be paying attention to it 20 or 30 years ago. And like I said, because Mexico doesn't have necessarily the sort of financial flexibility that other countries have, when a disaster happens, so when sea levels are rising in their low-lying areas, it's going to be harder to move those citizens later than it would be now.
So the big topic right now is obviously immigration. So then, is it safe to say that people will migrate to the U.S. due to warmer weather conditions?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can kind of, if you think that the U.S. has issues with immigration now, imagine that in 10 or 20 years. And so sort of a perfect sort of analogy to look at that would be to look at issues with the Syrian crisis, immigration in the European countries, in the European Union. They're being inundated with refugees, and they're having a tough time of where to put them. And that's one country. Like I said already, Bangladesh has had to relocate, and so they're relocating to places further inland and into India. So if we have climate refugees like those in Bangladesh or refugees like those in Syria on a global scale, so we're talking about every country, every continent is going to have issues with moving citizens away from larger bodies of water. It's sort of a natural idea to immigrate to these other countries like in Europe or the United States as it is. And so the countries are going to have a tough time dealing with their own citizens, let alone where to put the citizens. So here in the United States, we're going to have to start worrying about low-lying areas like New York and Florida and things like that. What do we do with our own citizens as sea level rise? And then we have more citizens wanting to come in.
So lastly, what types of measures should be taken in order to make a lasting impact on climate change?
So we need to start reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. We need to start reducing that now. Like I said before, doing that 20 or 30 years ago would have been even better. We don't have that option. So that's sort of the short answer. The long answer would be to start reducing our energy dependence on those fossil fuels. So start migrating and transitioning towards more greener or renewable energies, things like solar panels or windmills. The problem is our current sort of grid isn't set up to accommodate that. So as a stopgap for that, we can look at technologies that we already have, like nuclear energy. And that's actually proven itself here in the United States to be clean, efficient, and relatively safe if maintained. And so that can act in the interim to sort of buy us time. On the transportation level, we need to increase mass transportation methods. Here in California, we don't have very good mass transportation versus if you go to somewhere like Boston or something like that. It's pretty well thought out. And then we need to start looking at alternatives to gasoline combustion engines. So looking at things like hydrogen fuel cells and putting in infrastructure and things to support that.
Awesome. So you would say that Mexico would be detrimental because they use a lot of fossil fuel emissions with their cars and non-smog checks?
Yeah. So I mean, even here in the U.S., we have states that don't have smog checks. But yeah, so if the thing with Mexico, like I said, even though it has a low economy, things like the Paris Climate Accords are put in place to help that. Like I said, we're trying to leapfrog that technology and to help Mexico or these other developing countries not have to develop their own solar panels, not have to develop their own power methods. And so it's tough for us to say, Mexico should drive less cars when we're still driving more cars than Mexico, including more. And so countries like the U.S., Russia, China, we need to sort of set an example for those other countries, and we need to help, like I said, sort of leapfrog the technologies and help them with low interest loans and sharing of technology and things like that.